Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grayson. This is the KMG show for Friday, April the 29th, 2022. So, the situation we find ourselves in now is that so-called misinformation or disinformation, which of course is defined solely by the left, is now akin to terrorism. So it must be dealt with. There's going to be a serious effort in the United States to stop Elon Musk from buying Twitter. And in Canada, the government is going to bring in legislation effectively making me, everyone on social media, register with the government, which can take issue with me and, shut me down if they don't like what I say. And since what I say is not very favorable to the government, no, it doesn't look good. Here's an example of the setup for this operation. This is a piece by Max Fawcett in Canada's National Observer called "Have Far-Right Radicals Infiltrated Canada's Conservative Parties? We're about to find out." Yes, more concern trolling from a professional lefty. Oh, they worry so much about the Conservative Party, do they? Remember the good old days of the Conservative Party? No, they've always hated the Conservative Party, no matter who is in charge. He begins, "Be afraid, Canadian Conservatives, be very afraid." Only a few months ago, many of your leading lights embraced a movement that stated its intention to overthrow a democratically elected government. It was, as you know, led by a motley crew of grifters, racists, and far-right conspiracy theorists who have since been charged with a dizzying array of crimes. Yes, like mischief. Wow, that's a pretty severe crime, isn't it? Interim Conservative Party of Canada leader Candice Bergen and putative frontrunner Pierre Poilievre would probably like to create some distance between themselves and the movement they hugged a little too enthusiastically, and they're surely not alone. Well, too bad. Let's take a look at the other parties, the Liberal parties, the NDP parties. How many of these of their MPs been involved with Islamic radicalism, or Khalistani radicalism, or were former communists, say, or a communist adjacent? No, but we're not interested in that. Back to the National Observer. A public inquiry into the federal government's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act has been struck, and it will look into the events that led up to that precedent-making occasion. Justice Paul Rouleau, an Ontario judge who has been described as practical and thoughtful by his colleagues. What else are they going to say? Dogs don't bite dogs. Will examine the evolution and goals of the convoy and blockades, their leadership, organization, and participants, along with the role domestic and foreign funding and the spread of, wait for it, disinformation played into turning a protest into an illegal occupation. His report will be tabled in the House of Commons and Senate of Canada by February the 20th, 2023. Disinformation, such as these vaccines, which we're all bullied into getting. I am still a pureblood, which meant that I can't travel to the United States by any means, still. Can't get on an airplane, still. It turns out that Dr. Fauci's miracle seed came up a little short, both in terms of efficacy and safety. But it's disinformation to say that, apparently. That report should shine a crucial light on the growing influence of far-right radical movements in Canada and the degree to which they've infiltrated more mainstream institutions like the Conservative Party of Canada. That didn't just start happening over the last few months either. The Yellow Vest movement, which culminated in a convoy of its own to Ottawa, was marbled with white supremacists and far-right extremists, as National Observer's own Carolyn Orr noted in 2019. That same year, David Vigneault, director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, told a Senate committee his agency was more and more preoccupied with violent right-wing extremism. Can we have some examples of that? Violent right-wing extremism in Canada? Because the truckers' convoy, the Freedom Convoy, that was not violent. No, it wasn't. None of this seems to have registered with the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada, much less with Maxime Bernier, who came within a handful of votes, becoming its leader in 2017 before breaking off to form the People's Party of Canada. Surely they were aware of renewed warnings in late January from the Integrated Terrorism Assessment Center that the convoy about to emerge on Ottawa was filled with radical elements. Well, the organizers have declared that this is an act of peaceful protest, ITAC reportedly said in a document seen by The Guardian. Some ideologically motivated violent extremism followers in Canada have seized upon this rally to advocate for their own ideological objectives. And so, as national security expert, another one, Stephanie Garvin told the news outlet the protest leaders were exceptionally clear on what they wanted to do and how they were going to go about doing it. So why, rather than distance themselves from that movement as it approached the nation's capital, did so many leading Canadian Conservatives embrace it? And why, given what was already known about that movement's leaders and their extremist views, did people like Poilievre go out of their way to court them? Those are questions they're conspicuously uninterested in answering. If anything, they seem determined to double down and defend the occupiers, some of whom are facing charges ranging from mischief and intimidation to obstructing a police officer and perjury. In question period Wednesday, Candice Bergen suggested the inquiry was going to be another chance for the Prime Minister to call innocent people racists and misogynists and accuse them of all kinds of things that are factually not true. What is and isn't factually true will be up to Justice Rouleau to decide. Oh, isn't that great? An unelected judge has the power to determine to examine people's ideologies and determine which ones are good and which ones are bad. And he'll have plenty of leeway to do that, including the power to summon witnesses under oath and require them to provide documents. Conservatives have complained loudly that the government hasn't yet waived cabinet confidentiality around internal documents related to the decision to invoke the Emergency Act, with MP Raquel Dancho suggesting the inquiry will be useless unless they waive cabinet confidence and allow Canadians to know the story. But as Post-Media columnist Matt Gurney wrote, yes, this is the new trend in journalism where let's interview other journalists. We may not get to know the whole story here. It's very possible the government possesses information that has not been made public for valid national security reasons, which informed its decision-making and led Cabinet to believe the Emergency Act was warranted. It's always nice to see a journalist speaking up in favor of government secrecy. Oh, national security was involved. Oh, so it just, no. Either way, Canadians need to know as much as possible what happened in Ottawa earlier this year and why the government felt it was necessary to use the Emergencies Act. They deserve the fullest version of the truth possible, one that lays out in very specific terms the danger the government was seeking to avert. And they should demand that any elected official who aided or abetted acts of domestic terrorism be called to account for their words and deeds. Honk, honk, terrorist. For years now, Canada's Conservatives have played footsie with an increasingly radicalized right-wing populist movement. The sooner their relationship with them is brought into the light, the better it will be for everyone else. Did you note anything of substance at all in that story? How about the increasingly footsie-like relationship between Canada's media and Antifa? How about we look into that? So what is this Canada's National Observer? Well, it is one of the many, many news organizations in Canada that got $61 million just before the last election from the federal government. This was called emergency relief. There were nearly 1,500 companies, and one of them was the company that runs the National Observer. And they got, in emergency funding, $253,000, 594. 253, yes. So almost $254,000 in emergency aid. And I guess that that buys some loyalty. Wouldn't you think? Let's go to Rex Murphy. He has some questions about this inquiry. Did the Liberal government have any intelligence from outside its own established services, i.e. CSIS, CBC, favorite press gallery reporters, the Narwhal, the National Observer, Jagmeet Singh, the Toronto Star, Gerald Butts, Frank Graves, who's a pollster? The answer is, are you kidding? There are press subsidies for a reason. Indeed, an independent press, which depends on the government for its survival, is not very independent, is it? And Elizabeth Thompson, who was a reliable foot soldier in the war against mis and disinformation, well, she has a piece yesterday at the CBC. 1/4 of Canadians believe online conspiracy theories. Expert tells MPs the far right has evolved. This is from David Morin at the Université de Sherbrooke. 1/4 of Canadians believe in online conspiracy theories. An expert on radicalization and terrorism told a parliamentary committee Thursday. David Morin, a professor at Sherbrooke University, said a poll conducted for an upcoming report he is preparing for the Quebec government found that 9 to 10% of Canadians strongly believe in conspiracy theories, while another 15% moderately believe them. You mean the conspiracy theory that Dr. Fauci's miracle seed has fallen short in terms of both efficacy and safety? That conspiracy theory? Morant told members of the Public Safety and National Security Committee that some of those who believe conspiracy theories, but not all, have a sympathy towards violence. Well, that's helpful. Some of them do. The poll, run by the Leger marketing firm, was conducted online May to June 2021. The poll asked 33 questions, including questions about pandemic conspiracy theories. Yeah, there we go. There we go. So if one doesn't buy the narrative regarding Dr. Fauci's miracle seed, that makes one a believer in conspiracy theories and thus prone to committing terrorist acts. Lock them all up, I suppose. Moran's testimony came as the committee continued to study Thursday of ideologically motivated violent extremism, IMVE, in Canada. Morin, who was named last month to a federal government advisory group on rules to address harmful content online, said IMVE is a complex phenomenon driven by factors that converge and diverge, including far-right extremism, anti-government movements, misogyny, and conspiracy theories. Morin said that there's been a 250% increase in violent demonstrations in Western country over the past 5 years. Canada saw a 25% increase in hate crimes in 2020. You know what counts as a hate crime in Canada? Dirty looks. I am not making this up. Morin said there are a number of reasons for the increase in polarization, a loss of confidence in institutions, and the effect of social media and alternative media, as well as local and global contexts such as pandemic, economic crises, migrant crises, and climate change. Remember when the left loved alternative media? You remember those days? The nature of right-wing extremism has also changed over time, Morin said. Decades ago, he added, far-right extremists might have been neo-Nazis. Oh, you mean like the actual Nazis that the Canadian Army trained in Ukraine? The far right has evolved. The far right today is also people in suits and ties. Sinister. The far right has adopted a populist tone, presenting itself as a movement defending ordinary people from the elites, Morin said. He added that it would be a mistake to underestimate the risk of IMVE or to take the health of Canadian democracy for granted. Democracy being a system in which people like Professor Morin get to decide who's in charge. Doing nothing is no longer an option, Morin told MPs. What to do is another problem. History teaches us it is majorities and not minorities which topple democratic regimes. Is it now? Like in Russia in 1917? Warren also warned politicians about the dangers of partisanship and attempts to score political points over the threat of extremism. It's like walking around with matches in a dynamite warehouse, Morin warned. Yes, well, Professor, heal thyself. Morin said that misinformation and disinformation are a major problem, and countries looking to interfere with rival nations use social media to exacerbate existing divisions in society. He said regulations are needed, and while the government has monitored potential foreign interference in elections, Moran said it should also extend that monitoring to the period between elections and do more to educate Canadians. You want to know what this education would be? The government is your friend. The government only wants the best for you. The government can be trusted. So don't disagree with the government, because then you're guilty of engaging in a conspiracy theory, which probably makes you a terrorist. Moran also recommended that Canada's intelligence agencies reinvest in infiltrating far right extremist groups. Oh, has anyone ever heard of the Heritage Front, which was, I suppose, the most significant neo-Nazi movement in Canadian history, which was led and funded by, wait for it, the federal government of Canada. And things got pretty close to getting out of control with the Heritage Front, collecting lists of Jewish students at the University of Toronto, and the government mole telling members of the Heritage Front that talk is talk, but it was time to take the war to the Jews. Yes, that was the government of Canada. Government taxpayer funds paid for that. Carmen Celestini, a postdoctoral fellow with Simon Fraser University's Disinformation Project. Wow, there sure seem to be a lot of jobs in misinformation and disinformation. I suppose that's just a coincidence. Told the committee that conspiracy theories play an integral role in social political movements and the spread of extremism. QAnon has leapt from the online world to violence in the real world and is at present a global phenomenon. The conspiracy is spread predominantly through social media platforms. Adherents of QAnon conspiracy are not limited to a geographic range, with adherents and supporters found globally, including Canada. Note that there is no attempt, even a token attempt, to bring some balance to this story. None whatsoever. And what's happening in the prisons? This is again from the CBC, Catherine Tunney. Intelligence agency needs to keep a closer watch on extremism in prisons. Authors of internal review call out lack of coverage of people convicted of terrorism. And who might these people be? It is accepted that there is a radicalization problem within our correctional institutions, not only Islamic extremism, but also extreme right-wing white nationalism. Can you show some evidence of this? Is there any evidence? Is there any data in this story about all these extreme right-wing extremists, white nationalists in Canadian prisons? Given that Canadian prisons are heavily overrepresented in Native Indians and Black people, I wonder how many white people there actually are in federal prisons. It is quite difficult in my country to be sent to a federal prison. This requires an indictable offense, one with a punishment of 2 years or more. And prosecutors really don't like seeking these indictable offenses. Well, let's go to, I'm going to have more on this subject, the American side of it. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Brian Frakes. The Phantom Menace sounds like a title for a chapter of some lame movie serial, circa 1940s, 1950s. Actually, it was the title for a chapter of a lame, unending saga called Star Wars. Chogakin 666, hello, calls Joe Biden the Scranton Menace. Hello to Anrun Dan Allison, who says hello from Florida. Dawn from Beyond says that Florida is the best state. Hello to Dan. John S., who agrees. Anrun says, Biden is gaga, but I didn't find his kleptocracy stumble that bad, at least by his standards. He did realize he was misusing the word accommodate. That shows some brain activity. Hello, Halper, who says that Jim Kunstler was interviewed on the Praise of Folly channel 2 hours ago. Anran asks, is that a channel on TV? I've never heard of it. Hello to Oscar Toe, who said finally watched Reality Bites last night, enjoyed it. In no other movie is Winona Ryder as attractive as in Reality Bites. Anran says that is not a movie you use finally to describe watching, other than Winona looking sublimely cute. There isn't that much good about it. Seven Costanza, hello, says I need to send KMG a Stetson hat to wear on the show, a real Western Canadian. Yeah. There's a big division in Western Canada. I mean, there is that part, there's Vancouver Island, and the part, the littoral, which is on the western side of the Coast Mountains. The rest of British Columbia is pretty much Alberta, actually. There's a big, big difference between people who live in Vancouver and Victoria and those metro areas and the people who would live in, say, Prince George or Trail. True Greenbird says racists and misogynists are still innocent unless they've done some violent act. You would think so. You would think so. Okay, more talk about Winona Ryder and Natalie Portman. What do I think about Natalie Portman? I'm sure you're all asking. A beautiful woman, but I have seen no evidence that she can act. Dan says, imagine how quickly this journalist would wet the bed if an actual emergency happens. Hello to Tom Anderson. We're talking Gen X movies, are we? Hello to David Wright, who says, soon I hope Biden will be canceling mortgage loan debt, right? At 30 years of age, I wasn't capable of making financial decisions like that. Oscar Toe says, I might watch Singles tonight. It's a Cameron Crowe movie. I greatly enjoy that movie, actually. Matt Dillon, showing a real flair for comedy there. And it also has Peter Fonda's daughter in it. A beautiful, beautiful woman. Thank you for your kind words, Tom Anderson. Jogan 666 Jug Meat Sing. Yes. Okay, my new site has been in operation since 1999, and I've never received a peso from the government, says System Analyst. Tom Anderson says, funny headline from a Canadian outlet a few weeks ago. Conspiracy theorists keep getting things right. Experts say that's dangerous. I was never a fan of Janine Garofalo, says Oscar Toe. I was. I mean, I quite liked her on the Larry Sanders show, but then I don't know. She got bitter and angry and political and covered up her body with horrible tattoos. Yikes. Garofalo was good in Mystery Men, says Yo. David the Gnome says she's such a sort of bog standard hysterical lib with like a million personal problems constantly surfacing. Winona Ryder, she was arrested for shoplifting, which is the quintessential cry for help crime, at least for women. Tom Anderson says, KMG, do you think normies get tired of the constant use of buzzwords, far right, Nazi, racist, misogynist, etc.? It certainly tires me. I think a lot of them are. But I mean, it's diminishing returns, is it? When Sarah Silverman infamously said that Donald Trump was worse than Hitler, well, can you be worse than Hitler? Hello to British American. Canada is too ridiculous to continue. Night or the Prussians must come. Ben Stiller. Does Ben Stiller play... I have a lot of time for Ben Stiller, but does he play an angry jerk in every movie that he's ever been in? Because I've seen a lot of them, and he always seems to play an angry jerk. And he always seems to be showing off his abs. Oh, I suppose in that, Meet the Fockers, he wasn't an angry jerk at first, and then after being treated badly, he becomes an angry jerk. I like that scene on the plane with him saying bomb, 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 bomb. Just fed up. Just a whole host of microaggressions played against him, and he just snaps. I like that. There was some white guy with tattoos in Kingston. He was scary, I heard. There must be a big problem, says System Analyst. Oscar Toe says selling out was the biggest Gen X fear, no matter how good the art was originally. Josh Randall disavows. Why do they keep appointing lunatic females to position of power? Because horses for courses. Rich American says, remember the movie On the Beach? The world had just ended in nuclear fire, and they were just waiting for the radiation to reach Australia. We are now on the beach. That's a good film. Ken Russell, I praise to the sky, says BBC documentary on Edward Elgar. His movies get pretty hairy. I'll say that. Kevin equals Homburg. Yes, I like Homburgs actually. Chokin666 likes J.G. Ballard and says Matt Dillon is an interesting actor. He was very funny, and there's something about Mary playing the sleazy villain. Rice-A-Roni, aren't they in San Francisco? They're changing their image, and they're headquartered in Miami. That was a lie. Pretty funny. Ben Stiller's best movie was Zoolander, says David the Gnome. There's some funny stuff in it, but not enough to I think to justify its length. Who's the Wilson brother who was in it? He was hilarious. I got to say that. Used to be Stalin. Used to be Satan was worse. Now it's Hitler. Reminds me how Saddam overpowered Satan in that South Park movie, says Drew Greenberg. Beard. Owen Wilson. Thank you. Have you seen Severance yet, says Drew Greenberg. No, I have not. But I'm sure I will get around to it. So there is a piece by Charlotte Alter in Time Magazine. Remember Time Magazine? It's called Elon Musk and the Tech Bro Obsession with Free Speech, in scare quotes. I think, do you even need to read the story? Although tech bros, don't you just hate them? I thought we were told that these people in tech tended to be crazy leftists and transgender alphabet people, but now apparently they're frighteningly right-wing. It's Schrodinger's cat, again. They say that something is worth what someone will pay for it. If that's true, then protecting free speech, which Elon Musk has cited as a central reason he agreed to buy Twitter for $44 billion this week, may be worth twice as much as solving America's homelessness problem and 7 times as much as solving world hunger. It's worth more, to him at least, than educating every child in nearly 50 countries, more than the GDP of Serbia, Jordan, or Paraguay. Oh, so $44 billion could solve America's homeless problems. What? By buying a home for every homeless person in America? You'd be surprised how many people would say that they are homeless if that's it. Homelessness follows from the collapse of our society. And with the result that a significant number of people in our Western countries are crazy. In the days since Musk agreed to terms on a deal to take Twitter private, nearly all of Musk's tweets have been about freedom and censorship on the platform. Like, by free speech, I simply mean that which matches the law. I am against censorship which goes far beyond the law. Or Truth Social, terrible name, exists because Twitter censored free speech. And the extreme antibody reaction from those who fear free speech says it all. That last one is a generic bullseye, as James Burnham would say. Charlotte Alter is perturbed. Why does Musk care so much about this? Are you familiar with the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights? You know, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution of the United States? You know what they put in Amendment 1? Yeah. Why would a guy who has pushed the boundaries of electric vehicle manufacturing and plumbed the limits of commercial spaceflight care about who can say what on Twitter? Maybe he believes in free speech. Freedom of speech, again in scare quotes, has become a paramount concern of the techno-moral universe. The issue has anchored nearly every digital media debate for the last 2 years, from the dust-up over Joe Rogan and Spotify to vaccine misinformation on Facebook. Oh, vaccine misinformation. These people are not going to admit that they were spectacularly wrong about COVID-19. They're never going to admit it. Meta founder Mark Zuckerberg gave a major speech at Georgetown in 2019 about the importance of free expression, again, scare quotes, and has consistently relied on the theme when explaining why Facebook has struggled to curb disinformation on the platform. Fred Turner, professor of communication at Stanford University and author of several books about Silicon Valley culture, says it does seem to be the dominant obsession with the most elite, the most driven Elon Musks of the world. Free speech seems to be much more of an obsession among men. Boo! men. Don't you just hate them? Turner says the drive to harness and define the culture around online speech is related to, quote, the entrepreneurial push. I did it in business, I did it in space, and now I'm going to do it in the world, unquote. Business itself may be part of the motivation. Many of the most valuable digital platforms have business models that rely on mining user content for data and selling it to advertisers. From the platform's perspective, more speech equals more cash. But free speech, again, scare quotes, in the 21st century means something very different than it did in the 18th, when the founders enshrined it in the Constitution. The right to say what you want without being imprisoned is not the same as the right to broadcast disinformation to millions of people on a corporate platform. Well, I would recommend that Charlotte Alter familiarize herself with the 1946 U.S. Supreme Court verdict in Marsh versus Alabama, where the majority of the court held strongly that corporations cannot do whatever they want in terms of suppressing free speech. That the founders understood free speech to be a positive good. And so she says that free speech is different now than in the 18th. Well, how? How? In a culture that places a premium on achieving the impossible, some tech titans may also see the liberal consensus on acceptable speech as yet another boundary to break. Remember when the left was all about breaking boundaries? In Silicon Valley, bucking the liberal conventions about harmful speech can seem like the maverick move. Contrarianism is a big part of this free speech thing. If the left says, I can't do X, Y, Z, that makes a lot of people want to do it more. Says Peter Hamby, host of Good Luck America on Snap. What is that? And writer at Puck News. What is that? Contrarianism, whether it's embodied by Elon Musk or Andrew Yang or Bernie Sanders or Joe Rogan, becomes this ideology in itself. Wow, these people are still butthurt about Bernie running against Hillary Clinton. Jason Goldman, who was on the founding team at Twitter and served on the company's board from 2007 to 2010 before joining the Obama administration, says the tech rhetoric around free speech has become an obsession of the mostly white male members of the tech elite who made their billions in the decades before rapidly diversifying workforce, changed the culture at many of the biggest companies in Silicon Valley. Yeah, all these big tech companies, they were founded by, wait for it, white men. But that's a bad thing, of course. They would rather go back to the way things were, Goldman says, and are couching that in terms of free speech, scare quotes, or not going to allow politics to be part of the conversation. I have no idea what that means. Goldman says it's naive to believe that Musk can throw out Twitter's guardrails without degrading the platform. Well, the censorship move on Twitter actually only started around 2015 and only really intensified around 2017. Were all of these people howling back then? To say you're just going to allow for any type of abuse or harassment is an inherently anti-speech position. See, you get it? Because you're going to drive out a set of users who would use your product but no longer feel safe. Aww. Tech titans often have a different understanding of speech than the rest of the world because most trained as engineers. Ooh, those are scary people. Not as writers or readers. Trained. How do you train readers? By the way, I'm sure Charlotte Alter has some ideas on that. And a lack of a humanities education might make them less attuned to the social and political nuances of speech. Oh, you don't have a bachelor's degree in gender studies? Then you shouldn't be making important decisions regarding free speech. Tech culture is grounded in engineering culture, which imagines itself as apolitical, says Turner. Engineers, he adds, often see the world in terms of problems and solutions. And in that context, speech becomes a series of data points that get circulated through a data system rather than expressions of social or political ideas. Well, can't they be both? Focusing on free speech, scare quotes, as a way to justify relaxing restrictions on the platform, he says, is just another engineering solution to a political problem. Whether it's an engineering problem or a political one, it's Elon Musk's problem now. Again, what is the purpose of this article? Oh, Elon Musk is a bad person. Also, tech bros. And white men, don't you just hate them? You could have condensed this story to a paragraph. But it's so easy to write a story like that. There's no research whatsoever that went into that so-called report. And we're going to talk about this hilarious woman who is now the head of America's Department of Mind Control. This is from Steve Watson. At Summit News, Senator demands Biden scrap creepy disinformation unit, quote, dissolve this monstrosity immediately. Following news that the Department of Homeland Security's new Disinformation Governance Board will be headed by a woman who says free speech makes her, quote, shudder, and who falsely labeled the Hunter Biden laptop story disinformation, Republicans called for the body to be scrapped, labeling it a monstrosity. Heading the opposition to what has been compared to the Ministry of Truth in Orwell's 1984, Senator Josh Hawley wrote to DHS Secretary Mayorkas, noting, I confess I at first thought this announcement was satire. Surely no American administration would ever use the power of government to sit in judgment on the First Amendment speech of its own citizens. Sadly, I was mistaken. Rather than protecting our border or the American homeland, you have chosen to make policing American speech your priority. This new board is almost certainly unconstitutional and should be dissolved immediately. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy also responded to the development, describing it as Orwellian. Leave it to Democrats to think free speech is the problem and more government is the solution, McCarthy told the Daily Wire. The notion that the same party that spent 4 years promoting the Russian collusion hoax, suppressed the Hunter Biden laptop story, and equated parents to domestic terrorists believes it has the credibility to tell Americans what is true is laughable, unquote. Referring to Nina Jankowicz, the congressman added that it is telling that the person who would run Biden's Orwellian Disinformation Governance Board is a political activist who has a long history of falling for and spreading misinformation. Well, I mean, again, horses for courses. You want someone to crack down on so-called misinformation or disinformation? Get someone who is actively engaged in this, because the left is all about projection. Jonathan Turley, his website has a piece on this. Before it's too late, Democrats shift from corporate censorship to state censorship. A brave new nightmare. These words from former Labor Secretary Robert Reich described the threat created by Elon Musk's bid to restore free speech values by buying Twitter. Yet despite warnings that censorship is necessary for democracy to survive, neither the Tesla CEO and billionaire nor ordinary citizens appear to be sufficiently terrified of free speech. Twitter confirmed Monday that Musk will acquire the company in a deal worth $44 billion. Progressives, in the meantime, have adopted a dangerous shift in their strategy of calling for corporations to censor speech. Last week, former President Barack Obama made this shift clear in his much-covered speech at Stanford University. Just days after Musk reinforced his bid for Twitter with the support of many in the free speech community, Obama warned that social media was tilting us in the wrong direction. He called for more censorship of disinformation while calling himself pretty much close to a First Amendment absolutist. Barack Obama has never been in his life been an absolutist about anything except about Barack Obama. This man is really an empty vessel. Obama has never been viewed as an ally on free speech by those of us who have been attacked for our so-called absolutist views. Moreover, calling for censorship as a free speech absolutist is like claiming to be vegetarian while calling for mandatory meat consumption. Obama favors free speech only if it does not include misinformation, including what he considers to be, quote, lies, conspiracy theories, junk science, quackery, racist tracts, and misogynist screeds, unquote. Well, I'll just remind everyone, I'm sure you know this already, but the government of the United States and the government of Britain claimed in 2002 that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and that he had something to do with 9/11. And so a vast coalition was formed to invade Iraq whereupon it was discovered that the whole thing had been made up. However, it was notable that Obama called himself pretty close to a First Amendment absolutist, not a free speech absolutist. The point becomes clear later in the speech when Obama noted the First Amendment does not restrict private businesses from censoring speech. The First Amendment is not the full measure or definition of free speech, which many consider a human right. And, oh, this is funny. This is from Kane at the Citizen Free Press, and he has a tweet from the recount. Senator John Kennedy, Republican of Louisiana, mocks Twitter executives as wokers and the crank wing of the Democratic Party. Quote, easy to recognize, most of them eat food only fit for rabbits. They almost always enter a swimming pool by the stairs. You see, he's calling them sissies. Tyler Durden at Zero Hedge. The head of the Biden administration's new disinformation governance board, Nina Jankowicz, isn't just a huge fan of Christopher Steele, architect of the infamous Clinton-funded dossier which underpinned the Trump-Russia hoax and who joined the chorus of disinformation agents that downplayed the Hunter Biden laptop bombshell. Glenn Greenwald had tweeted, I don't know the exact percentage, but I know the vast majority of self-proclaimed anti-disinformation agents peddled the Steele dossier, the fairy tale that Russia seized control of the U.S. with blackmail, and the CIA fabrication of Russian bounties in Afghanistan. If you spent the weeks before the 2020 election spreading and ratifying the CIA lie that the Biden family emails were Russian disinformation and then never apologized or retracted it, you have zero credibility to lament disinformation. You are a disinformation agent. And I suppose we've all seen the TikTok with Nina Jankowicz in a cod English accent singing a song from My Fair Lady with new words about mis and disinformation. It is cringe to the extreme. Jankowicz previously served as a disinformation fellow. It's just an entire industry just sprang up almost overnight. A disinformation fellow with the Wilson Center and advised the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry and the government of Ukraine. They're completely legit. They are clean as a whistle. As part of the Fulbright Clinton Public Policy Fellowship, that would be William Fulbright, the longtime senator from Arkansas, who was resolutely against America becoming embroiled in foreign conflicts. Jankowicz also oversaw the Russia and Belarus programs at the National Democratic Institute. Any of these institutes, these NGOs, these initial NGOs, they're all about color revolution. That's their whole point. Jankowicz also pushed for economy-killing lockdowns in 2020. Here's a tweet from March the 21st. Anyway, long story short, I think we as a country might be too free-spirited, to put it diplomatically, to comply with social distancing recommendations unless they're forced upon us. So force away, lock us down. People are not taking this seriously. Isn't Nina Jankowicz also done? She also sings erotic Harry Potter songs because, of course, aren't these, I'm not all that familiar with the Harry Potter series, but aren't these children? They're children, right? And so you're eroticizing children? So, and free speech, more of free speech. This from Igor Chudov at his Substack, Igor's newsletter, Free Speech Threatens the Entire West's Power Structure. I support free speech, he begins. That means I support having as few boundaries on who can say or repeat any idea as possible. I've been online for decades, moderated some forums, own a popular website serving millions of users, and believe in maximum laxity of moderation. As the owner of this Substack, I have not once deleted a message for its content other than commercial spams, despite seeing tens of thousands of comments, few of which I dislike greatly, but never deleted. I cannot help but notice that people get overly excited about Elon Musk buying Twitter and think that at the flip of a button, we can have an inclusive worldwide conversation of tens of millions of important people where free speech is actually realized and almost no one is muzzled. I hope that we all understand just how much of a threat true free speech is to COVID criminals seeking to avoid responsibility, to many important institutions, and to the entire edifice of behind the scenes shadow power structures. They understand the threat better than us. They will not give up without a fight, as their lives, relevance, and livelihoods are literally at stake and require elaborate suppression mechanisms to fend off threats. The Securities and Exchange Commission got very busy bringing newly invented charges against Musk hours after his Twitter announcement. From CNBC, SEC reportedly probes Tesla CEO Elon Musk and brother over recent stock sales. EU bureaucrats also woke up and are literally tweaking their new misinformation law to address Elon Musk buying Twitter. Why are they rushing to start new prosecutions and write new rules all of a sudden? What's the rush? Are the powers to be overreacting? Not at all. They are scared for a reason. Before we go further, this post will be intentionally light on substantiation of underlying assumptions and will omit very many relevant angles of the free speech story. The reason for it is that its COVID-related part is a culmination of many COVID posts I've shared here, and my readers generally would agree with many COVID-related underlying assumptions of this post. I'm not writing this to change minds of people cheering for censorship or to recruit anyone into any case. The entirety of the last 2 years was dominated by the COVID pandemic. This pandemic also brought to us an unprecedented amount of officially propagated lies and manipulation, and all-reaching censorship needed to sustain those lies. The purpose of these lies was to make us take a radically novel COVID vaccine based on mRNA technology that had no successful product in its 20-year history, developed for a novel coronavirus, although no vaccine of any kind ever worked for any coronavirus. We are supposed to believe that this vaccine took brilliant scientists just 2 days to develop, although now we see that vaccines against variants cannot even take off the ground despite months of efforts. We are supposed to believe that SARS-CoV-2 virus had a natural origin, despite HIV GP120 gene inserts and genetic code from a 2017 Moderna patent, with the same health authorities eager to hide their own reckless involvement in creating SARS-CoV-2 in a lab. As I explained in my previous post, none of that would ever have a chance of succeeding without blocking dissent from reaching most people. Silencing of people like Steve Kirsch and many others was essential to produce vaccine compliance. The campaign of lies and censorship ended badly. The pandemic was only amplified by vaccination, with the number of people injured by vaccines or having endless or chronic COVIDs due to vaccination is in many millions. The problem that health authorities are having now is having to face responsibility for the result. Acting fraudulently and thus in bad faith makes them responsible for the outcome. The mainstream media, who willingly produce thousands of dishonest articles and TV reports, also bears grave responsibility. Their lies and bad faith, as opposed to honest mistakes, makes the press responsible, and the press knows this. Similarly, the giants of the so-called social media were indispensable when it came to promulgating lies and shutting off the truth. All of those players will inevitably face increasingly hostile questioning from millions of sick people and their relatives as soon as their narrative implodes. That is why they are so desperate to sustain that narrative. Apologizing and stepping aside is not an option for them. They need censorship to literally survive. And that's an excerpt from an essay at the Substack of Igor Chudov called Igor's Newsletter. Let's go back to the chat. Hello to John S. Yes, extra super califragilistic X. Yeah, I can. Yeah, that was the song. Yeah. No, that was not My Fair Lady. That's Mary Poppins. Mea culpa. Hello to Hypocrite at the Gate. Oscar Toe says, good to see the Biden people hired a literal witch materialized from hell to fill a disinfo position. How percent? Hang on. There are people smoking marijuana on the balcony, and I do not want to inhale it. Halper says that Jankowicz is a gay man trapped in a woman's body. She gives off these really powerful drama kid vibes, doesn't she? MC5 did nothing wrong, says Don Willis. The MC5 was a Detroit hard rock band, the early 70s, and they were associated with John Sinclair, the radical leftist creator of the White Panther Party. This hurt them. You know, they were selling revolution outright, and it sort of overshadowed their powers as a band. The information society has become the disinformation society, says True Greenberg. True enough. If Obama had a single creative impulse in his body, he would do a TV show with Sam Hyde, says Oscar Toe. Oh, what a time to be alive, says Brandon Smith. Bruce Springsteen. As previously mentioned, Bruce Springsteen was effectively brainwashed by two rock critics, John Landau, who actually did a good job on the second MC5 album, and Dave Marsh, who was once editor of Cream magazine. Hello to Mercurius Aulicus, who says, where's the usual sirens? Well, it is, Friday afternoon. Yes, I don't miss them, though. Of course, Matt Dillon in Single says this great demented rant about how he used to live near the airport, and there just was this overpowering noise. But then, he got used to it, and then when he moved away from the airport, he missed the noise. And Bridget Fonda is staring at him. What are you talking about? What does this have to do with anything? Barack Obama's positions are always evolving, says True Greenberg. Okay. I found the Yarvin interview boring, says John S. Moldbug needs an IRL editor to smack him in the head every 5 minutes and tell him to get to the point. I stopped reading that fellow years ago because I consider myself a fairly intelligent man, and I would read to the end, and I thought, well, what is the point of this? What is the point? Hello to my trail of disgrace. Sam Hyde suspended on Twitter today. Was probably the Bezos quote tweet that did it. Yeah, probably. I'm not going to repeat it. It's a gross sexual insult. Okay. And now, do I want to? Oh, no, this is fun. Yeah, this is funny. Michelle Goldberg is concerned. And when Michelle Goldberg of the New York Times is concerned, you know that things have come to a pretty pass. The awful advent of reactionary chic. David Brock, the conservative journalistic hitman turned Hillary Clinton acolyte, described how he first became a reactionary in his 2002 book, Blinded by the Right. Given about what I know about David Brock, I suspect there was some man involved, some sort of romantic crush. That's why he went from being the star of the American Spectator to Media Matters or wherever he is, because he fell in love with some gay Hillary Clinton staffer. In his book, Blinded by the Right, he arrived at the University of California, Berkeley at the dawn of the Reagan era as a Bobby Kennedy-worshipping liberal, but quickly grew alienated by the campus's progressive pieties. Rather than a liberal bastion of intellectual tolerance and academic freedom, the campus was, though the phrase hadn't yet been coined, politically correct, sometimes stiflingly so, he wrote. A formative experience was seeing a lecture by Ronald Reagan's UN ambassador, Jeane Kirkpatrick, shut down by left-wing protesters. Wasn't free speech a liberal value, he asked? The more Brock challenged the left, the more he was ostracized and the more his resentment pushed him rightward. By the time he got to Washington, where he became an influential conservative journalist, he developed what we now might call an edgelord sensibility. He traveled to Chile to write a defense of the murderous dictator, Augusto Pinochet. I was flippantly engaging in the extremist one-upmanship that characterized not only me, but many young conservatives of the era. Of course, not just that era. The dynamic Brock described, extreme one-upmanship meant to scandalize hated left-wing persecutors, is a major driver of right-wing cultural innovation. What right-wing cultural innovation? The right wing has pretty much abandoned culture. That's why stories about the American New Right, also called the dissident right, national conservatism, and neo-reaction, seem so familiar. even if the movement's ideology is a departure from mainstream conservatism. Yes, yeah, that's why it's a good thing. Last week, Vanity Fair published James Pogue's fascinating look at the American New Right's constellation of thinkers, podcasters, and politicians, many funded by Peter Thiel, a tech billionaire who once wrote that freedom and democracy are incompatible. It's hard to summarize the scene's politics and milieu that includes both the aggressively anti-cosmopolitan Senate candidate J.D. Vance of Ohio and the louche hipster podcast Red Scare doesn't have a coherent worldview. Oh, does Michelle Goldberg have a coherent worldview other than I'm always right and everything has to be done is exactly as I say? What it does have is contempt for social liberalism and a desire to épater les bourgeois. It is a project to overthrow the thrust of progress, at least such as liberals understand the word, Pogue wrote. One of the movement's leading intellectual lights is Curtis Yarvin. Yeah, I'm not going to talk anymore about that guy. According to Pogue, the movement has become quietly edgy and cool in new tech outposts like Miami and Austin and in downtown Manhattan, where new rightish politics are in, and signifiers like a demure cross necklace have become markers of a transgressive chic. A cross necklace. Is that like garlic to the vampire that is Michelle Goldberg? That's just, ooh, a cross necklace. That is just so edgy. Does Michelle Goldberg think that Christianity, the existence of Christianity in the United States, is some sort of myth propagated by evil right wingers? The BuzzFeed news writer, Joseph Bernstein, yep, BuzzFeed News, that is ever reliable, captured this energy in a March article about an anti-woke New York Film Festival funded by Thiel and headed by a black queer provocateur named Trevor Basil. Call it, if you must, a vibe shift, a new generation of internet native tastemakers, like many of the people crowded into Basil's party, who find the moralistic gatekeeping of millennials all a bit passé, wrote Bernstein. I don't. Black queer provocateur has what to do with the new right? This vibe shift was predictable. When the left becomes grimly censorious, it incubates its own opposition. The internet makes things worse, giving the whole world a taste of the type of irritating progressive sanctimony Brock had to go to Berkeley to find. I've met few people on the left who like online progressive culture. I think you're lying. In novel set in progressive social worlds, internet leftism tends to be treated with disdain, not a tyranny, but annoyance. In Tori Peters' Detransition Baby, a young trans woman, yeah, okay. For those who get most of their politics online, this can be what the left looks like, a humorless person shaking her head at others' insensitivity. As a result, an alliance with the country's most repressive forces can appear to some as liberating. I suspect that this can last only so long as the right isn't in power nationally. Eventually, an avant-garde flirtation with reaction will collide with the brutish Philistine reality of conservative rule. Now who's the extremist? As Brock would discover, being a gay man in a deeply homophobic movement was not cheeky fun. The conservative movement, so-called, is rife with homosexuality. Doesn't Michelle Goldberg know this? In the short term, however, it's frightening to think that backlash politics could be somehow fashionable. Backlash politics. Oh, there'd never been backlash politics in America before. Oh, wait. After Franklin Delano Roosevelt became president and constantly railing against rich men in pinstriped suits with all of their power, and this power had to be destroyed and given to the people, that sort of backlash politics. Oh, somehow fashionable, especially given how stagnant the left appears. In New York Magazine, Sam Adler-Bell recently wrote about a dispiriting lull in progressive movement building. There appears almost no grassroots energy or urgency of any kind on the Democratic side. That one thing the left could count on in recent years is its cultural capital. What happens if that is squandered? That's the piece. That's it, folks. What did it take her like 10 minutes to write this and 30 seconds to think it up? It's the standards, I'm afraid, at the New York Times are are not, they're not very high. This is an interesting piece, somewhat off topic, from Alex Berenson at his Substack Unreported Truths. The death of San Francisco. San Francisco might be the most beautiful place in the world if you've ever been here. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Berenson was in San Francisco because of his lawsuit against Twitter for permanently banning him from the platform for saying things that are true. The bay, surrounded by hills on all sides, the bridges and container ships and ferries and cable cars, the brightly painted townhouses and crazily curving streets. The people are pretty too, wind-kissed women striding the streets. So why does the city feel like it's dying? I'm not even talking about the homeless crisis on the streets around the Civic Center and the Castro and the Mission District. I spent the day walking the city's northeastern quadrant, neighborhoods that have so far resisted the tent encampments and open-air drug markets and sidewalks littered with needles and human feces to the south. The day was bright and breezy, a perfect San Francisco spring afternoon, and the streets were practically empty, aside from a few blocks in Chinatown, as lifeless as they were beautiful. The city felt like the backdrop for a dystopian sci-fi movie, with ads promoting brands that don't seem to exist anywhere else, and strangely outfitted self-driving cars popping up surprisingly often. Addimab? What's an Addimab? Apparently it's a self-driving car. Most disconcerting of all, I'm not sure I saw a single child. I must have, but I can't remember any. I certainly didn't hear any, didn't hear them yelling or running or laughing. I would have noticed. They would have stood out. San Francisco has been desperately short on children for decades. As a percentage of its population, it has fewer kids than almost any major American city. Barely 1 in 8 of its residents are under 18. San Francisco is expensive and difficult, Berenson writes, but Manhattan is also expensive and difficult, and Manhattan has far more kids. Note, for whatever reason, the pretty girls and boys here seem particularly unable to pair off and take the final step into adulthood. Before the pandemic, the lack of kids was less noticeable because San Francisco was growing overall. But from mid-2020 through mid-2021, the city's population fell almost 7%, a huge shift. Only Manhattan had a bigger drop. Yet home prices in both are higher now than they were 2 years ago, despite the outflow, a disconnect from reality driven by easy money. The missing children reminded me that San Francisco had imposed some of the strictest pandemic restrictions anywhere in the United States and held on to them longer than almost anywhere else. It kept its schools closed longer too. I don't think that's a coincidence, Berenson concludes. Cities are their residents, and no American city has more narcissism and beauty and fear than San Francisco. Its wealthy residents anyway, live in a present too perfect to make room for the future. And let's turn to Jim Kunstler's column for today, which you can find at kunstler.com. This is this. De Niro's character Michael famously told Casal's Stan in The Deer Hunter, explaining the metaphysics of the bullet in his hand. And pretty much everyone watching the movie got the drift of that cryptic utterance. Likewise, Elon Musk's character, Elon Musk, explained to America's Maoist managerial legions, free speech is free speech, as if, a week after Twitter's surrender to Elon, there was some part of the formulation that the left didn't understand. Apparently, all of it. What a concept. Free speech is free speech. It has bowled over the maybe 23% of the country that considers free speech a threat to democracy. This is what comes of inverting and subverting language itself for the purpose of mind-raping the nation like Jeffrey Epstein on a 15-year-old. The left has exercised a Macumba voodoo death grip on free speech for years now. The deeper the left's crimes against the Constitution and common decency, the harder they strangled the flow of news, information, and opinion until the mental life of the USA turned into a gibber of shameless, obvious unreality. It's one thing to lose your dignity as citizens and another to just lose your country altogether. And that is the circle of hell that the left has dragged everyone else into since even before Hillary Clinton booted the 2016 election. The tyrannical Maoist managerial mob, grown paradoxically rich beyond precedent, became a tool of the state itself, working around the inconvenient First Amendment to hogtie public debate. Will the US government allow Musk to get away with liberating the new public square? It looks like the DOJ, the SEC, and perhaps other nefarious actors of degenerate officialdom are fixing to go after the rogue Tesla mogul who had the effrontery to oppose totalitarian control of the narratives driving public life. It's rumored that money-losing Twitter could not exist without the government footing the bill for the vast backstage server arrays that enable all Twitter's messaging. In an odd twist, though, the shareholders were not necessarily benefiting from that symbiotic relationship, as Twitter's stock fell from $71 a share in July 21 to $32 in March 2022. But the C-suite of Twitter's executives were already too massively rich to care about anything but punishing their political enemies, which they did with sadistic zeal when Musk surprisingly stepped onto the scene. The government's first countermove under the vividly deliquescing Joe Biden, whose treasonous corruption became Twitter's job one to conceal, was to concoct a brand new agency under Homeland Security called the Disinformation Governance Board, to be run by one Nina Jankowicz, internationally recognized expert on disinformation and democratization, who also happened to be a Russiagate shill and publicist for the 50 national security officials who labeled the Hunter Biden laptop story Russian disinformation. Turned out not. In other words, America now has a truth commissar who is a soldier in the war on truth. Such a desperately stupid maneuver could only come from a regime close to collapse, just as the feculent particulars on Hunter Biden's laptop are being revealed by many in possession of copies of the laptop's hard drive, and while concurrently the U.S. Attorney in Delaware, David Weiss, leads an investigation into Hunter B's business dealings. Those included large-ish payments from nations hostile to American interests for opaque services rendered. So you have a chief executive, JB, compromised mentally and legally and installed via a janky primary and I'm not going to say that, and some young cookie fresh out of the Princeton Fellowship bake shop is going to defend him like Wonder Woman wielding her magic lasso of Aphrodite. Homie, don't think so. Homie, think the whole wretched episode of orchestrated national bad stuff is about to come tumbling down, along with the miserable ghoul in the Oval Office. And that will be followed by the fun of seeing them try to eject Kamala Harris from the scene and replacing her with the likes of Barack or Michelle Obama. Don't believe it? Just watch. Of course, all that will be small potatoes to the reveal of cosmic ineptitude or gross criminality, perhaps both, that is bound to come as Twitter opens up the discussion of our government's role in the COVID-19 fiasco, which I aimed to help kick off with my first tweet in a long, long time, viz. Moderna and Pfizer vaccines don't prevent infection or transmission of COVID-19. The vaccines have harmed millions who trusted the CDC. Whoever at CDC is responsible for squashing early treatment protocols must answer for the deaths of many thousands. And, oh, yes. You've all seen the rainbow flag. There seem to be a whole bunch of different ones, though. And the trans people, the Troons, they have their own flag, of course. And there's a large, handsome brick United Church a few blocks from where I live. And they fly the pride flag. And they have painted the steps from the street to the doors of the church, Christian church, at least nominally, with the pride colors, letting you know who their real Lord is. But American judges have this annoying habit of doling out whimsical punishments. And here's an example. This is a story by Maya Yang in The Guardian. Judge orders man who defaced Pride mural to write essay on Pulse shooting. Judge says he needs more time to determine a punishment and orders Alexander Jerich to write a 25-page essay on a 2016 massacre. And this was the 2016 Pulse Gate nightclub shooting. 25-page essay. Last June, the city of Delray Beach in South Florida unveiled a rainbow mural at an intersection on the 5th anniversary of the attack, in which a gunman killed 49 people at the club in Orlando. A few days later, police noticed tire skid marks that were approximately 15 feet across the painting, according to an affidavit. Cell phone footage sent to authorities showed then 19-year-old Alexander Jerich driving towards the intersection in a white pickup truck with a Donald Trump flag draped over it. According to the police, he had attended a 30-car rally for the former president's birthday on June the 14th. The video clearly shows a white Chevy truck stopped at the intersection and then intentionally accelerated the vehicle in an unreasonable, unsafe manner in a short amount of time. The Chevy truck continues to recklessly skid sideways. The video shows that the driver willfully drove the vehicle with disregard for the safety of any other persons or property. Then why not charge him with that? Using the license plate captured in the video, police located Jerich, who agreed to turn himself in. He pleaded guilty to charges of criminal mischief and reckless driving and agreed to pay $2,003 to repair the mural. During a hearing last Thursday, Jerich hung his head, cried, and apologized for his actions, but did not offer any explanation for them. I've had problems in the past with fitting in, he said. I was just trying to fit in and be accepted. Rand Hoch, the president of the Palm Beach County Human Rights Council, a local alphabet people rights group, pushed for a year-long sentence for Jerich. But Circuit Judge Scott Suskauer appeared to be taken by surprise by Jerich's personality, saying, "I was expecting someone who displays complete disrespect for their fellow citizens, a person some might call a thug or a redneck." He said he needed more time to decide on a punishment. In the meantime, he ordered Jerich to write a 25-page essay on the 2016 nightclub massacre in Orlando, asking him to research the backgrounds of the victims and their loved ones. "I want your own brief summary of why people are so hateful and why people lash out against the gay community," Suskauer told Jerich, ordering him to return to court on June the 8th for his sentencing. Suskauer also asked him to perform community services with alphabet people organizations. However, according to Hoch, none of the groups he is affiliated with are interested in working with Jerich. They don't want the defendant anywhere near our organization on our missions. Okay. Suskauer said he also may order Jerich to visit the intersection every week alongside his father to keep it clean. Why don't they just order him to become homosexual and get it over with? Now, Maya Yang conveniently forgets to note in this story that the shooting up of the Pulse nightclub was not an anti-gay attack. The shooter simply found a list of nightclubs in that city, and that was the one. That's the first one. Just, okay, I'll go there and shoot it up. It was not an anti-gay hate crime. It was purely a coincidence that this was, in fact, a gay nightclub. This is now common knowledge. No one disputes it, but here we see the media once again determined to prop up a busted narrative. It's afraid. They are afraid. This is from LGBTQ Nation. They're a nation now. Did you know that? Conservatives declare war on alphabet people's suicide prevention hotline and call it pedophilia. They'd rather have a dead child than a gay child. And who is this story by? Alex Bollinger. Okay. Conservatives spent the last couple of months calling everyone who disagrees with them a pedophile, and now they're setting their sights on the Trevor Project, an organization that runs a hotline and other resources to fight alphabet people, youth, suicide. Okay, I've heard of the Trevor Project. It's named after someone called Trevor. And back to this story. So, yes, conservatives have created a false narrative. Colin Wright, an editor of the anti-alphabet people website Quillette, I thought it was intellectual dark web. Is it notably anti-alphabet people? Shared a comic from the Trevor Project that explained how teens could erase browser history and escape the site quickly so that they could get help, even if they were worried about being outed to their parents. Wright didn't seem to be able to understand how something like this could help young people and instead said that the point of the feature is to keep parents in the dark. Of course it is. That is clearly the point. Moms for Liberty tweeted, "Why is the Trevor Project encouraging children to keep secrets from their parents?" And there's a little cartoon here of two young gays, uh, homosexual men who are clearly below the age of consent. But I suppose that's just a coincidence. Nothing to do with pedophilia. Lauren Chen tweeted, "Left-wing activists are predatory groomers. If you sit around designing and promoting ways to get in touch with kids so you can discuss sexuality and keep it from their parents, you are a groomer, period, full stop." Jesse Kelly tweeted, "They're trying to break your children." Mother tweeted, punished mother. That doesn't sound good. "The Trevor Project works to prevent alphabet people kids from committing suicide. That's it. It's actually a matter of public safety to have this person's identity known if she's going to be this hateful and dishonest." This referring to the woman who runs Libs of TikTok. James Lindsay, the professor who is best known for getting a fake academic paper published in 2017, claimed that it's only a matter of time until solid evidence of serious wrongdoing emerges regarding the Trevor Project. Okay. This is what you might call misinformation. That reference to James Lindsay suggests that he was a bogus scientist, but that's not what happened. And Zach Beauchamp at Vox covered this story 4 years ago. "The grievance studies are so-called squared hoax aimed to discredit gender and critical race studies. Did it work? No, of course it didn't work, because you can't discredit gender and critical race studies, certainly not at Vox. An ethnography of men who attend restaurants like Hooters, research on rape culture among the dogs at Portland dog parks," and another one which I won't mention because it's too disgusting. These are all real articles published in real scholarly journals written by a group of 3 people: magazine editor Helen Pluckrose, mathematician James Lindsay, and philosopher Peter Boghossian. If you like parodies of a certain style of academic research, you're right. Pluckrose, Lindsay, and Boghossian wrote and published the articles as part of a year-long hoax campaign targeting fields like gender studies. Pluckrose et al. Wrote 20 papers and submitted them under false names to a variety of journals. By the time they ended the experiment in early October, 7 of the 20 had been accepted for publication. In a lengthy write-up explaining the sting, the authors described their hoax as proof that fields focusing on identity, gender studies, queer studies, critical race studies, etc., were corrupt to their core. Grievance studies, as they chose to refer to these fields, elevate politically fashionable nonsense over rigorous scholarship. Quote, "These fields of study do not continue the important and noble liberal work of the civil rights movements. They corrupt it while trading upon their good names to keep pushing a kind of social snake oil onto a public that keeps getting sicker," unquote. Oh, so Harvard political scientists said, "God, this is dumb. It's an amazing cell phone that these people didn't even engage in a scientific process." Whoosh. So yeah, that's the context there. But we can see the reason that Alphabet People Nation devotes so much coverage to this evil conspiracy theory is that they're scared. Why are they keeping this from parents? Let's talk about the Boy Scouts of America. The Boy Scouts of America decided some years ago to allow homosexual men into their organization. Guess what happened? On October 19, 2012, the Boy Scouts of America were forced by court order to release over 20,000 pages of documentation on 1,200 alleged child sexual abuse cases within the organization. Between 1965 and 1985, legal claims against BSA for such matters continue to the present day. Following its bankruptcy in February 2020, over 92,000 sexual abuse claims were filed with the bankruptcy court before the November 16, 2020 deadline. Yeah. So homosexual predation was a problem in the Boy Scouts of America, even before homosexual men were allowed to become scout leaders. So what did they do? Come on in, boys. The water's fine. In December 2021, the insurer for the Boy Scouts of America agreed to pay $800 million into the fund for victims. But no, they're not done yet at the Boy Scouts of America. Ryan, the Patriot 1796, has a tweet thread here. The Boy Scouts of America, once a great organization, has gone completely woke. This has been known for some time, but for the first time, they are now forcing in onto the individual scouts a merit badge by the name of Citizenship in Society, whose main goal is to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. It better stated, diversity, inclusion, and equity. Will be required to get to Eagle Scout starting in July. As you can see in the overview, they have their mission statement of diversity, equity, and tolerance. They also dive into identity politics, saying that they welcome people of all identities, a clear affront to the Scout oath when it talks about moral straightness. In the next slide, they talk about the oath and law, despite the fact that they stand in direct opposition to the values featured in both. They want you to research very far left topics like identities, inclusion, and equity. To be clear, this is indoctrination. They want to teach your kids about far left ideas, and if you don't do it, you don't get to Eagle. This is truly despicable and evil. Then they force you to interview someone who has a different identity that's different from you, which in practice means straight white. Insert any so-called non-marginalized. Kids will have to interview people who are deemed non-privileged. This will cause only more division. Then it wants you to talk to your counselor about how you will go about living your life according to this twisted document. Reminder that this will be Eagle required in July. The conservative movement needs to stand against this unless they want to permanently lose another institution. Inclusion has done nothing good for scouting. An example would be letting women in scouts, which has destroyed the previously all-male environment, or the inclusion of gay scout leaders, which led to the rape of many young men, along with the bankrupting of the organization. Now, I'm going to read now the Scout Oath. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country and to obey the Scout law, to help other people at all times, to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. And here is the Scout law. A Scout is trustworthy. A Scout is loyal. A Scout is helpful. A Scout is friendly. A Scout is courteous. A Scout is kind. A Scout is obedient. A Scout is cheerful. A Scout is thrifty. A Scout is brave. A Scout is clean. A Scout is reverent. Yes. Well, that's not the Boy Scouts anymore. All that stuff, you know, the oath, such like, it sounds like very dead white male, doesn't it? Oh, and some news from Canada that the gay advocates have been pushing for this for many, many years. This is Jacques Gallant at the Toronto Star. Health Canada lifts ban on blood donations from men who have sex with men. And what happened the last time in Canada homosexual men were allowed to donate blood? What happened? Well, one of the results is that the Canadian Red Cross was stripped of its control over the blood supply, because so much blood was contaminated by homosexual men in Canada that, the Canadian Red Cross had a problem. So they could dump out the contaminated blood, pour it down the drain, and use blood which they had got from the United States, which they knew to be clean. But the Canadian Red Cross decided to save a few bucks by using contaminated blood. Since this is Canada, no one went to prison for this. Canada's ban of blood donations from men who have sex with men, homosexuals, I believe they're called, is finally being lifted after Health Canada announced Thursday it was ending a policy that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau described as discriminatory and wrong. There's all sorts of medical policies, which are discriminatory. Hey, I have hepatitis and I demand to give blood. No, we can't have you infecting other people with your hepatitis. That's discriminatory. Well, it is discriminatory, actually. Idiots like Justin Trudeau think that discrimination is universally a bad thing, and it is not. So, how many of these troons are there? Well, again, this is from the Toronto Star, Jeremy Nuttall. Canada now has picture of trans and non-binary population. Census data shows 1 in 300, or 0.33% of Canadians over the age of 15 are transgender or non-binary. Non-binary, as far as I've been able to tell, means I'm not normal. I'm different. It can mean other things, but that's at the base of it. I don't want to be labeled. And so in terms of, sexual practice, it effectively is meaningless. This is from David McClune at LifeSite. Illinois school district forces radical alphabet people ideology on preschoolers as young as 3. The curriculum teaches kids that those who feel like a girl and a boy, or neither like a boy or a girl, are transgender, while asking them to explore their own gender identity. This is in Evanston, Illinois. They're just determined to push it as far as they can. And they don't seem to be worried about the consequences, the possible consequences to them. Why are adults talking to 3-year-olds about their sexuality? This is obviously malign. A story at a Daily Wire by Luke Rosiak. This is a cult. How wealthy Santa Barbara foreshadowed the fight against crackpot curriculum. In the fight to protect school children from radical curricula, the canary in the coal mine was a California coastal community once home to Ronald Reagan's personal ranch and now home to ultra-wealthy white liberals, as well as a large underclass of poor Hispanics. Fair Education's First in the Nation lawsuit lit the spark for the prairie fire that has spread across America to provide parents with the information and knowledge needed to fight the racially divisive, anti-American, sexually over-the-top indoctrination occurring daily in our schools, beginning in kindergarten. Santa Barbara is a very wealthy city indeed. I sometimes get the impression that these wealthy white liberals, they feel secretly proud that their children end up being broken. It seems to be a badge of honor for a lot of them. And in Is This the Last Straw news, this is from Peter White at Deadline. Tyra Banks to executive produce teen drag series for Discovery Plus. That's Warner Brothers, by the way. Discovery Plus is entering the world of teenage drag shows with Tyra Banks. The Dancing with the Stars host and EP is to executive produce Generation Drag for the streaming service. The series follows 5 teens and their families as they anticipate their biggest drag performance at Drag-U-Taunt, a drag show designed as a platform for alphabet people teens to express themselves. Discovery Plus will drop all 6 episodes of the series on June 1st. The series follows Jameson, Noah, Vinny, Bailey, and Nabila, as they prep for the event. It will follow the teens at the Drag Ball event, as well as their parents as they head to Denver, Colorado. It is produced by Made in Chelsea producer Monkey. That's it? Just Monkey? Which is part of Universal International Studios in association with Bankable Productions and Catfight Productions. I suppose that must be Tyra Banks. Made in Chelsea is an English show, an English reality show about the most obnoxious people on earth. The first time I saw clips from Made in Chelsea, I thought this is an obvious parody because there can't be these people. They're too obnoxious. It's just too over the top. And there was this one character with very long hair who was a breakout star from Made in Chelsea, who was supposed to be bisexual. This fellow appeared genuinely mentally retarded. In this heartfelt and joyous coming-of-age series, Generation Drag celebrates a group of amazingly talented teens who put their creativity, passion, and talent on center stage, said Howard Lee, president of TLC Streaming and Network Originals. Jameson, Noah, Vinny, Bailey, and Nabila may only be in their teens, yet they are well beyond their years in being true to themselves and recognizing the importance of living authentically. Their story is an inspiration to express yourself at any age, No grooming going on there. I have such admiration and respect for these teens. They are bravely navigating, coming into their own in a world that can be very challenging and not always accepting. What is so beautiful is seeing their parents and siblings supporting them, added Tyra Beggs. These teens' laser-focused tenacity inspires my team and me, and we are honored to share their stories. I can't wait for these popping personalities to show, wait for it, their fierceness to the world. Well, someday a real rain will come. Let's go to the chat. See what is going on there. Jameson. Yeah, this is another example of a trend. What is it? The trend is 20, 30 years old. Taking bog Irish surnames and using them as Christian names for your children because you've got it in your head somehow that this makes them classy. Okay, let's go to the bottom of the chat. Scroll up. Oscar Toe says, seems to be about all Seminole Indians being slave owners. Boy Toy Scout, says Brandon Smith. Neil Terry says a lot of wealthy California coastal areas were surprisingly conservative, posed as more liberal than they were. But recently, a lot of chickens coming home to roost and younger woker take over. Oh, we're talking about that Cotto fellow. Is he a native Floridian? Asks Anrun. Hypocrite of the gate. I'm not going to repeat your joke. You can't oppose the grooming of children, support homosexual marriage. The one follows from the other. Can't win unless we start opposing both openly, says True Greenbird. I believe you're right. Anrun points out that Evanston, Illinois is a college town, the home of Northwestern University. Yo Mama says when reality is homophobic, ignore reality. Mobilizing the useful idiots has never been easier, says Brandon Smith. Very white, dead white male, says Brian Frakes. Hypocrite of the Gate says that essay could be an opportunity for telling how social justice is leading to our ruin. California is proof the masses can't be entrusted to vote things better, says Brandon Smith. Well, you know, California was a reliably Republican state until the borders were opened. And then, of course, Reagan disastrously signed the amnesty for illegal immigrants. Oh, we're taking steps to make sure that this never happens again. And no steps were taken because it was an obvious stitch up. Brandon Smith says the market meltdown is going to price a lot of people out of polite society. Anwar says it's very sad what San Francisco has become. It is such a beautiful city with a great climate. Well, Vancouver and Victoria are beautiful cities too, and the story there is much like that of San Francisco. Portland, again, beautiful city. True Greenberg says gay nightclub was off message, terrorist fail. Hello to Pete Bauman. Let's see, I love the smell of napalm in the morning, says Brian Frakes. Nothing smells as good as tobacco burning. Today, tomorrow will be my 21st anniversary of quitting smoking, says Hypocrite at the Gate. True Greenberg says for a long time, the first lines of the San Fran song conjured a scene of a man meeting a woman at the airport and recognizing her by her flowers. I was disappointed when I actually read the lyrics. The song was written by Scott McKenzie, if I recall. Burstein saw him Hyde interview is a grand classic, says John S. What's with all these new articles on the new right? Be afraid, be very afraid. That's the point of it, that the conservative movement needs to be resuscitated. Conservatives are reliable losers, so we have to let them control the right. Why do you think David A. French was invited into the New York Times and the Atlantic because he is controlled opposition. And of course, you asked for it, and here it is, a return to Joseph Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Society. A complex society pursuing the expansion option, if it is successful, ultimately reaches a point where further expansion requires too high a marginal cost. Linear miles of border to be defended, size of area to be administered, size of the required administration, internal pacification costs, travel distance between the capital and the frontier, and the presence of competitors combined to exert a depressing effect on further growth. Thus, empire growth tends to follow a logistic curve. Growth begins slowly, accelerates as the energy subsidy is partially invested in further expansion, and falls off when the marginal cost of further growth becomes too high. Once conquered, subject lands and their populations must be controlled, administered, and defended. Given enough time, subject populations often achieve, at least partially, the status of citizens, which entitles them to certain benefits in return for their contributions to the hierarchy and makes them less suitable for exploitation. The energy subsidy obtained from a conquest is highest initially due to plunder of accumulated surpluses and then begins to decline. It declines as administrative and occupation costs rise and as the subject population gains political rights and benefits. Ultimately, the marginal returns for the conquest start to fall, whereupon the society is back to its previous predicament. Now, however, the marginal cost of further expansion has risen ever higher. Thus, lacking dependence on such energy sources as fossil fuels, the limited technical development of which the ancient world was capable, and the extensive territorial expansion for which it is noted, could only provide a temporary respite from declining marginal productivity. The latter tendency, in particular, resulted in a situation where collapse, when it did occur, affected a wider territorial sphere in a more devastating manner than might have otherwise been the case. And that is the end of that chapter. And next week, I will read from Chapter 5, Evaluation, Complexity, and Marginal Returns in Collapsing Societies. It begins with a quote from a Chinese poet on the Chao collapse: "The people desire a disorder." You know, again, I've been rereading Kotkin's marvelous biography of Stalin, and just looking how few Bolsheviks there were, how little of the country that they actually controlled, in 1917, 1918, how everything was completely falling apart, the length and breadth of Russia. It's really amazing that they prevailed, probably because their leftist adversaries, like the socialist revolutionaries, were too gutless to do anything about them. So the amount of American aid to Ukraine has now topped $50 billion. So I think that the Ukraine has now officially or semi-officially replaced Israel as America's 51st state. This is Tyler Durden at Zero Hedge, submitted by Ronan Manley at bullionstar.com. On Tuesday, the 26th of April, in an interview with newspaper Rossiyskaya Gazeta, the Secretary of the Russian Federation's Security Council, Nikolai Patrushev, said that Russian experts are working on a project to back the Russian ruble with gold and other commodities. For those who don't know the name Patrushev, he is one of Russia's most powerful security intelligence officers and a close ally of Vladimir Putin. After serving between 1999 and 2008 as director of the Russian Federal Security Service, FSB, the successor organization to the KGB, Patrushev moved to being secretary of the Russian Security Council since 2008. In fact, Patrushev took over as director of the FSB in 1999 from the previous incumbent, Putin. So when Patrushev says Russia is working on a plan to back the ruble with gold and commodities, it is not just anyone saying this. It is being said by the highest echelons of the Russian government. Yes, Biden and Trudeau and Boris Johnson and all the other smarty pants decided to wreck the world trading system, because what's the worst that could happen? How about the dollar being dethroned as the world's premier currency? How about that, huh? Of course, with so many things happening now, I think, is this Build Back Better? Is this all part of Build Back Better? Let's look at antiwar.com. Biden under fire for forming DHS disinfo board. Biden asks for 33 billion, another 33 billion for new Ukraine aid. House votes to revive the World War II era Lend-Lease program for the Ukraine. The Ukraine is never going to pay them back. They understand this, right? With us or with them in a new Cold War, how about neither? Biden wants to give Russian billionaires seized assets to Ukraine. NATO to back Ukraine against Russia for years. Russia says pumping arms into Ukraine threatens Europe's security. Swedish Prime Minister rejects holding referendum on NATO membership. Mounting evidence that Canada trained Ukrainian extremists. Mounting evidence? This is a fact. This is a fact. This is from Christy Somos at CTV News. With mounting evidence pointed to the Canadian Armed Forces having trained members of Ukraine's military who are also reported to be part of extremist groups. You mean Nazis? Experts say Ottawa needs to strongly bolster its investigation and vetting of the soldiers it trains and arms in the embattled country. The group in question, which calls itself Military Order Centuria, or simply Centuria, has links to the far-right Azov movement. Okay, I'm just going to search here for something. Oh, the word Nazi. They finally get around to using the word Nazi. Burkel's social media features Nazi symbols and other extremist views. This is Azov regiment leader Kirill Burkel. Again, the Ukraine. Is that a country? Is that an area, part of the world, which has been particularly hospitable to the Jews throughout history? No, it has not. And I can't vouch for the claims made in this story, which comes from the News Glory. A party in the Netherlands is interested in the origin of Zelensky's $850 million fortune. Again, I don't know. This is the Dutch Conservative Party Forum for Democracy. On its website, it said, according to various estimates, Zelensky's fortune is estimated at $850 million. He did not receive most of this amount until he became president. The party said, more importantly, what's the purpose of these funds? So, and of course, we're told, no, he's not rich. He's just a multimillionaire. Again, comedian, member of a comedy troupe in the Ukraine. How do you get to be a multimillionaire doing that? Huh? How does that work exactly? And, okay, I think we've, this is from Summit News. Lawsuit alleges 15-year-old boy was driven to suicide by bullies saying he was unvaccinated. Oh, and here's another story from a sinister story from the Toronto Star. And, oh, yeah, come on, bring back those mandates. Bring back the mandates. You know why? It's something that I mentioned a few days ago. This is from the Star editorial board on April the 25th. So there's a new study in a prestigious medical journal that shows people who don't get vaccinated against COVID-19 are not just putting their own health in danger. They also contribute disproportionately to the risk of infection for those who do get their shots. How could that possibly work? Isn't the whole point of this mRNA therapy is that it's supposed to keep you becoming infected by the coronavirus? How do we know that it isn't, unvaccinated people that aren't at risk from the vaccinated people? They also contribute disproportionately to the risk of infection for those who do not get their shots. You mean like dogs and cats? This sounds like. With that out of the way, we now eagerly await the study that shows water is wet and the one that shows heavy objects tend to drop to the ground if you let them go. Wow. When did the editorial board of the Toronto Star get so snarky? Hmm? Well, this study is bogus. It is entirely bogus. And we'll let William Briggs, statistician to the stars, point this out, or explain rather. He wrote yesterday, 2 exciting new models have been released. One says the vaccinated should fear the unvaccinated. The second, a new scientific AI computer mathematical model, has concluded experts should be launched into space. William M. Briggs, who calls himself the statistician of the stars, is lead author of the second study. This exciting new model, done on a computer, is very scientific. It has many science equations in it. It concludes experts have to be launched into space. Dr. Briggs has a PhD degree from an Ivy League university, which allowed him to code his mathematical science model on a computer. Not only should experts be launched into space, said Dr. Briggs, but they should not be afforded the luxury of a space suit. Dr. Briggs also said that the model insists that this should be done as soon as possible. Dr. David N. Fissman, co-author of the new model on COVID vaccination, and one of the experts will soon be slung into the outer void, said, I don't like the idea, but I'm powerless to dispute a computer science math model. My fate is sealed. It's true, dear readers, my model is on a computer and is therefore indisputable. Here's how propagandists are portraying Fissman's paper. Being with unvaccinated people increases COVID-19 risk for those who are vaccinated. Modeling study. Briggs comments, a mathematical model. Well, there's no questioning these, right? This mathematical says that your vaccine stops working when you're within so many feet of an unvaccinated person, just as the Kamala Harris speculated when she said we had to protect the vaccinated from the unvaccinated. Vaccines are funny things when they appear in mathematical science models like this one. Methods. We constructed a simple, susceptible, infectious, recovered, compartmental model of a respiratory infectious disease with 2 connected subpopulations, people who are vaccinated and those who are unvaccinated. We simulated a spectrum of patterns of mixing between vaccinated and unvaccinated groups that ranged from random mixing to complete like with like mixing, complete assortativity, in which people have contact exclusively with others with the same vaccination status, unquote. Briggs comments, the emphasized words tell you all you need to know. That, and do let me know if you heard this before, all models only say what they are told to say. And he has a video on that and a paper. A model that says the vaccinated should stay away from the unvaccinated was told to say that. It is, of course, possible for a model to be told something useful. Did this one? Writing of this amazing new work, physician Byram Bridle says Fissman et al. Is only thinly veiled hate speech under the guise of science. Bridle identified a number of places where the model was told to say the wrong things. The list is large. I'll quote only one, the shortest. Quote, fatal flaw. We did not model waning immunity. I was flabbergasted by this assumption. COVID-19 vaccine-induced immunity is ridiculously short-lived. In contrast, naturally acquired immunity is much longer-lived. This differential effect would have had a major influence on the outcome of the mathematical model. This assumption by the authors ignores obvious scientific facts, unquote. And Briggs concludes, he also, God bless him, had the patience to work through the Fissman model, which is in Excel. Yes, Bridle found the whole thing revolved around one bad assumption. Correcting only this one assumption completely reverses the conclusion of the paper. Once again and altogether, all models only say what they are told to say, and this one was told to say something asinine. White House comms director Kate Bedingfield tests positive for coronavirus despite being jabbed and jabbed and jabbed. And but keep in mind, folks, the vaccines are extremely effective. I mean, they're a miracle. They're just a miracle. Developed at warp speed. This is from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The FDA approved use of antiviral therapy, remdesivir, to treat COVID-19 in infants 4 weeks and older, despite having no evidence the treatment is effective or even safe for young children. I mean, it is just patently obvious what these people are intending to do. Remove the control group. That if everyone gets vaccinated, then what conclusions can we draw about the efficacy of vaccination? No, it's going to be rather difficult, you know. Let's go to thedailyskeptic.org. England's wave continues to collapse despite having no restrictions. Office for National Statistics data suggests 2.4 million people in England were infected with COVID last week, down by a quarter in just 7 days, the Mail reports. 1 in 20 eligible children have COVID jabs amid lackluster take-up. Well, that is certainly good news. Evidence-based medicine, it was a good idea until it died. What we currently have is a crisis in evidence-based medicine, says Dr. Malcolm Kendrick. The evidence that we use is at best flawed and incomplete, at worst just plain wrong. Yet this is the evidence used to create the guidelines and drive the targets. Airbnb to let staff work from home indefinitely. And the sanctions debate is a mess. All right. A few days ago, and who is this writing this? Philip Pilkington. A few days ago, I wrote a piece highlighting the energy embargo that Russia had placed on Poland and Bulgaria. Russia made clear weeks ago that they would not sell oil and gas to unfriendly countries if they weren't prepared to pay in rubles, which Poland and Bulgaria said they weren't. As I noted at the time, the Russian move was clever and likely to work. Some commentators responded to my piece that I did not understand the situation properly. In fact, they said the embargo would not threaten Poland and Bulgaria because it only hit their gas supplies. Apparently, Poland has so much surplus energy that removing a significant part of it is not going to make any difference. Former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO says we are using the Ukrainians as our proxy forces. Congress is supposed to approve America entering wars, but this power was taken from them, going back to Harry S. Truman? Sorry, with Eisenhower, with the police action. No, sorry, that was Harry Truman, the police act, so-called police action. See, it's not a war. It's just a police action. But you're shooting and killing people, and they're shooting at you and killing our soldiers. Yes, but it's a police action because that's what police do. They regularly congregate in very large numbers and kill a whole bunch of people. And in turn, a whole bunch of them get killed. That's police work. Vaccine rollout correlates with 25% spike in cardiac arrest emergency calls for young adults, study finds. Arctic ice is not rapidly vanishing. Study finds similar trends over at least 200 years. Yes. This has been known ever since Nansen, that the Arctic ice is constantly on the move, constantly changing, constantly waxing and waning. But I guess, since that was discovered over like 120 years ago, we forgot it. We forgot it because it was inconvenient. And Michael Lind has a fine essay at tabletmag.com, The End of Progressive Intellectual Life, How the Foundation NGO Complex Quashed Innovative Thinking and Open Debate, first on the American right and now on the center left. I've never liked the term public intellectual, he begins, but like its 19th century predecessor, publicist, it describes a social type that plays a useful role in liberal democracies in which at least some government decision-making is influenced by open debate rather than secret discussions behind closed doors. To influence voters, public intellectuals write for a general educated public, not necessarily the less educated majority, in ordinary language, not jargon. Like the policymakers whom they also seek to influence, they are necessarily generalist. In the service of what the Brazilian-American public intellectual Roberto Unger calls a strategic program, public intellectuals ponder connections among different policy realms, economic, foreign, and cultural, if only to ensure that one policy does not contradict another. Public intellectuals tend to annoy their own side by probing its internal weaknesses while trying to convert members of the other team rather than simply denounce them. The centralized and authoritarian control of American progressivism by major foundations and the nonprofits that they fund, and the large media institutions, universities, corporations, and banks that disseminate the Progressive Party line has made it impossible for there to be public intellectuals on the American center left. That is not to say that progressives are not intelligent and or well educated. It is merely to say that being a progressive public intellectual is no longer an option in an era in which progressivism is anti-intellectual. If you are an intelligent and thoughtful young American, you cannot be a progressive public intellectual today any more than you can be a cavalry officer or a silent movie star. That's because in the third decade of the 21st century, intellectual life on the American center left is dead. Debate has been replaced by compulsory assent, and ideas have been replaced by slogans that can be recited but not questioned. Black Lives Matter, Green Transition, Trans Women Are Women, 1619, Defund the Police. The space to the left of center that was once filled with the magazines and organizations devoted to what Diana Trilling called the life of significant contention is now filled by the ritualized gobbledygook of foundation-funded single-issue nonprofits like a pond choked by weeds. Having crowded out dissent and debate, the nonprofit industrial complex Progressivism Inc. taints the Democratic Party by association with its bizarre obsessions and contributes to Democratic electoral defeats like the one that appears to be imminent this fall. Consider center-left journals of opinion. In the 1990s, The New Yorker, The Nation, Dissent, The New Republic, The Atlantic, and Washington Monthly all represented distinctive flavors of the center-left, from the technocratic neoliberalism of the Washington Monthly to the new left countercultural ethos of The Nation and the snobby gentry liberalism of The New Yorker. Today, they are bare Xeroxes of each other, promoting and rewriting the output of single-issue environmental, identitarian, and gender radical nonprofits, which all tend to be funded by the same set of progressive foundations and individual donors. But of course, the same thing has happened on the right, or Conservatism Inc. There used to be lively debates in these places. Well, National Review used to be readable, say. But we found recently that these so-called conservatives have learned nothing. Oh, let's rush into the Ukraine because we all love the Ukraine. We've always loved the Ukraine. We've always been obsessed with the Ukraine. They learned nothing from what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. Nothing at all. So, again, this is an essay by Michael Lind at tabletmag.com. And I'm going to take a final look at the chat before wrapping it up for the week. True Greenberg says, note, the Kremlin doesn't call it a war either. Enron says, again, a hot take I slightly believe is they will find a way to call off the midterm elections. Accelerationist. Waning immunity, i.e. planned obsolescence, says True Greenbeard. Brian Frakes, gotta go. Been fun. Well, thank you. Che Blutarsky says, say what you want about Ukraine, but they figured out the key to the game was kicking back funds to the Demon Rat Party. Dems will blow up the world if needed to protect their kickback scheme. Well, a fair amount of this money is kicked back to Republicans as well. There's lots of money to go around. Half of 404 will poof disappear, says Brian Frakes. Oscar Toe says, we'll see if Build Back Better is serious if all the elite-backed student debt forgiveness. Well, there's a lot of people who have actually paid off their debt, and I've seen indications that these people are already furious at the idea of debt forgiveness. I had to slave for years to pay back $60,000, and these people, it's just going to wave a wand and it disappears. The 60s had a lot of one-hit wonders, says Brian Frakes. Yes, indeed. Hello to respectable commenting name. With all that money, Zelensky can now buy another Y for his last name, says Dan. I like that. Kato is the new famous gumshoe in the noir of the new right, says Oscar Toe. Scott McKenzie, a one-hit wonder. He was in a very prominent folk band, if I remember correctly. John Phillips was in. Maybe he was in a band with John Phillips. They were friends. I'll just look this up here. Scott McKenzie. Oh, his real name was Philip Wallach Blondheim III. That doesn't sound friendly at all. Okay, let's see. Oh, he sang with Tim Rose, and he knew John Phillips way back in the day. And oh, the Journeyman. Yeah. He was in this group called the Journeyman, and Creaky Alley. You can hear about those old folky days in a humorous song by the Mamas and the Papas called Creaky Alley. So that is it for, hello to Seraphim Goose. Okay, final word from Divot the Gnome. The upright become prey in the land where there is no truth. Paraphrasing from Proverbs, I believe. So I'll be back on the air next week, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all for tuning in. It's greatly appreciated, as always. If you'd like to make a donation to this live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations may be made directly to the live stream via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.